Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Data Analytics Chat, where we explore the exciting world of data analytics and looking at the landscape and also discovering the challenge that it brings. Today, we've got a great topic to discuss. It's going to look at the future of AI and the impact it will have within user experience. So I guess obviously AI is significantly impacting user experience and shaping how we interact with technology. I guess now it's offering highly personalized experiences and the ability to analyze user data and behaviors to understand individual preferences. And then this is being able to tailor to specific users' needs. So obviously it's an interesting space and a growing space, and I think it will continue to grow, in my opinion. So I'm delighted to welcome special guest Bryce Macher onto the podcast. So Bryce, it's going to be a growing space. I think a lot's happening, and there's a lot of great products already out there, should we say? So do you want to give a brief introduction of yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Bryce Macher. I am currently the VP of Personalization and Recommendation Science at NBC Universal, where my team supports personalization across multiple apps and digital experiences for NBC Universal's media content. Our space has been radically changing very quickly in response to some of the Gen AI buzz. And some of that's driven by technology changes. Some of that is actually being driven by, some people call it hype waves, but I think it's actually a usability wave where the barrier to access for something like a general transformer has now been removed. People are making art, people are making text assistants, they're making their own chat agents very easily through these UIs. And I think that's transforming the speed at which teams like mine are expected to evolve. For example, prior to NBCU, I was at Warner Media, and we were actually building UI tools and design tools and writing tools for places like the newsroom based off of smaller transformer models. But the demand, the scalability, the performance of those has really accelerated thanks to Gen AI, ChatGPT, Gemini, the conversations about smaller models like Gemma, et cetera. And so that's what I focus on in my day-to-day now is how do we leverage some of these new capabilities? How do we ride some of those waves to give people personalized experiences that cater to what they need in a specific moment?
Yeah, definitely. I think obviously, like you mentioned, the data available now is massive. So there's a lot more you can analyze and get results. So I was just doing a bit of research, and so some interesting figures. Now, AI has, I think AI powers over 2.4 billion customer service conversations with chatbots. So, I mean, that's increased just through the new technologies. And also, the global market for AI in UX design is expected to reach 12.6 billion by 2027. So obviously a lot of people do fear that it's going to take their jobs, but I think it's more going to be collaborate with the technologies and apply that to your work. And it's let that do the hard work, heavy lifting, and then you do the strategic and analytical parts.
Yeah, if you think back to like one of those early axioms you learn in data science and analytics, it's like, a well-formed question is 90% of the battle. And I think what these tools allow everybody to do, whether you're talking about, a technical field like analytics or analytics engineering or data science or MLE or ML ops, or a more, a more user-centric aesthetic field, user experience design, even your marketing, creative copy. What this allows you to do is start to ask and put all of your time into asking the right question and then leveraging these tools to find the answer to the right question. Now, most of the outputs of these things still need to be, tended to. Customer service you can get away with in some ways. There's some great architectural designs using watchtowers and other model artifacts or entities to control the back and forth between chat agents and real users who are coming into like a customer care chat. But we're still seeing some of the downfalls of that, right? We've seen people buy trucks for $1. We've seen people get discount airfares and go after those. And so, I think that there's this space where we still have to remember that humans have a role What we're trying to do with
Yeah.
AI is the same thing we've always tried to do with tools, which is make it easier and faster for people to get to the parts of their jobs that they like and automate, classic Python text, just automate the boring stuff.
Yeah. No, definitely. I think like key, I think it is efficiency, isn't it, within businesses? So yeah, okay, cool. All right, so let's move on to the first question then. So I mean, obviously, you've worked in the field. How has AI impacted the field of user experience?
I think it's impacted on two sides. One is the producer side and one is the consumer side. So on a producer side, we're seeing a lot of tools come out that help people imagine how they would build user interfaces, how you build interactivity. From a game side, we just saw Google release Genie and start having conversations around how you can use generative modeling, for lack of better phrase, to build 2D platformer games. So we're starting to see all of this kind of producer-facing AI tools where you can focus on the problem that you want to solve and have the tools help you get to that solution. On the user side, what's exciting about Gen AI is you're actually seeing the user experience become more personalized. You're able to see things like, your data. I don't think we're far off from a world where historically your Spotify Wrapped, there's a great meme on LinkedIn that happens every year. And it's like, look, Spotify Wrapped is the most successful monetization of a SQL account query, right? It does a really wonderful job giving you base statistics about the things you watch and the things you might like based on simplistic, heuristic questions. I think the world we're going to get to on a user side from a user experience is one, like things like your Spotify Wrapped or the Netflix version or the Peacock version actually dive into giving you some deep-seated self-discovery journeys, if that's something that attracts you. And then that'll start to bleed and feed into the user experience, what you get recommended at a specific time, the way the user interface changes, the types of programmatic events, like, if there's a big release of Oppenheimer, like, do you get this mega Oppenheimer experience on Peacock? Or if we think that you're not going to be a fan, you just get the regular Peacock experience. A user experience from that perspective is going to be a really interesting space to see change, both in terms of what are the classic user experiences, but also what are like user-centric data that we give back to users.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely now, obviously, you've got the data now, you can do that more A/B testing, which is all gets automated. So you're getting more results, aren't you? And then you're refining them and refining them, refining them. And it's going to get that personalization on point for people, which is obviously going to be beneficial for individuals. So how do you envision the role of AI evolving in the realm of user experience in the coming years then?
I think it's going to do what we saw in personalization and content curation for even the front end of websites and in products. So what I mean by that is that if you look across all the big media players right now, whether you're talking about the big tech ones like Apple and Netflix and Amazon to an extent, or you're talking about your traditional media environment, Warner Brothers Discovery, Peacock and Comcast and NBC Universal, Paramount, Lionsgate, etc. All of those teams, what used to be the content curators and the personalization data scientists, are very tightly integrated together, usually by product teams. And they share a common goal and vision because, at the end of the day, there was a moment where it was like, personalize everything, give it to the robots, go on. But even at Peacock, we noticed that there are moments where the just like creative genius of curators, content curators, whether it's to like entertain and make you laugh or to kind of make you feel uneasy and scared with horror content, they do a really good job building things that robots aren't good at, using humor, using contextual cues, thinking about what users actually want to relate to. Those are things that humans will forever do in personalization that the robots can't, as it were. And product facilitates that in a digital space. I think you're going to see that start to take over even to the base level of design. Every brand's got an identity. Historically, that identity has been rooted in things like color and shapes and feels. Like, are we going to get to a world where user experience designers, marketing, creatives, etc., are starting to build brands that can be everything to everyone, or everything to a bigger group of people. And that's going to be the same collaboration. There is magic in what human beings do. Like if you think about movies, practical effects are just so much more interesting to look at than computer generated effects. We can computer generate some really amazing effects, right? The folks that work on Call of Duty have a bank of tank images, tank sounds, etc., and they can build the ultimate tank. But if there's something that's humorous in the moment, it's going to take the human intervention to take all of that tank data and make it that humorous item that's maybe live for a week. And that's really about the connect and relate to an interface, whether it's media, gaming, brand technology, etc.
Yeah, no, I definitely think it's. I mean, even now you've seen it within. I mean, even the last couple of years, within like data scientist type roles, that's evolved into more product. Like the product, they're looking for. That's the skill set is more. I guess having that product mindset now to get more out of their. I guess gaps in the market. Like how can they improve their solutions, services, etc. So even that's more like I guess you're morphing into new skills, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the introduction of data product as a concept or a framework into the data world has actually driven all of us to think more about the types of models and well, that's actually the language right there. It makes us think about these models that we used to build as capabilities, and how do we use those capabilities not only to meet the immediate need, but also build them in generalizable frameworks that allow us to meet other needs, right? So we're thinking about 4U style recommendations, which are typically sequential engines. I'm going to give you a sequence of content that I think you're going to like, and I'm going to order it in a specific way. Ultimately, that powers a 4U rail, but can I use it to sort other things on the website? Can I sort all the tiles across a media component using that same technology? Or do I need different technologies? How does it change? I think that's a really powerful mindset shift for data scientists that data product brought in. And I think it was very crucial, perhaps by coincidence, but very crucial for this translation into a Gen AI world where, you can have executives who are kind of just like, banging out paper prototypes and chat GPT, and then bring them to you and say, okay, I have this idea, help me figure out, is this doable at scale for a service? Can we integrate this somehow? What are the findings? And really at the end of the day, how do I change this thing I just did on my desktop into a product that's powered by data scientists to have a bigger scalable impact on users for the better?
Yeah, no, definitely. And then you touched on sort of personalization. So how is AI changing the way we approach personalization in user experience?
There's a couple of ways to think about it, and I'm going to start with a very simplistic analogy, and that's that from a modeling side, you're trying to build the DNA of a user, and you can do that in a couple of ways. You can look at the breadth of things that they've watched or purchased or considered purchasing, and you need a big time span to do that. Let's say you have the ideal user for your commercial app, your CPG app, and they come once a week and they buy 3 things. And you might say, hey, for my recommendation models, what I'm finding is building the perfect DNA for a user to build better recommendations means I need 6 months of that. What Gen AI does is it allows us to look at each of those objects you bought in, say, like the last 2 weeks. And rather than scale horizontally through time to get that DNA, we can start scaling vertically and really making, multi-dimensional understandings of those things you're buying so that we can get to a complete DNA picture faster. So the training data shrinks, the relevance of the things you're buying to your new recommendations grows. And that's all being driven, in an ideal space with no friction by Gen AI. I can pass the items that you're buying into Gen AI, look for different ways of embedding them, whether it's images or descriptions or critiques or tell me about a movie that this thing was in, etc. We're building these latent dimensions that you might not even realize exist to increase that thumbprint. And so I think from a UX perspective or from a user experience perspective, recommendations and personalization are going to get significantly better if we think about it in those terms. Now, the caveat to that we always have to keep in mind is that, Netflix, as much as it loves you and wants you to watch the things you love, it is also not a charity, right? They have obligations to the folks they license content from. They have obligations to their own in-house production. And so sometimes those recommendations get, they have to go through that lens of business. So it'll be interesting to see the ways in which we balance that like utopian promise of pure Gen AI powered recommendations against against different business models that want to promote content. They want you to buy this, this pencil sharpener instead of this pencil sharpener, or they want you to buy this phone instead of this phone, even though the phone they're going to deprioritize is the best, most relevant recommendation to you. I think that's what's going to be fascinating to watch play out. And if we're thinking about your classic user experience, researchers or designers or engineers, that's the space where their eyes are really going to be, is how do we balance the business obligations to that pure user advocacy experience.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's personalization. I think you've had that. I think the automation's just streamlined everything so much quicker now, isn't it? And it's just it's just speeding things up. So it's getting more knowledge. It's a lot of brain, isn't it? It's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Understanding the users better. So cool. And so how's AI been leveraged to, I guess, enhance accessibility in user interfaces for a more inclusive user experience? And
I think you're seeing this in a couple of different ways. We've already seen the power of smaller models, pre-trained models like BERT and the like from Google, in terms of generating text off of an image. So being able to take an image and auto-generate that caption. And then it got built into products like Keynote and PowerPoint, et cetera. So that they're automatically pushing an accessibility experience as the default. And I think that's been one of the most wonderful things about this journey to Gen AI, is that there was a very early moment where the technology was kind of almost from the get-go doing these interesting accessibility and innovation moves. And there's some really great scholarship out there by people like Mara Mills and Jonathan Stern that look at, specifically for deaf communities, the accessibility angle has always been a huge source of innovation that then generalizes and scales in amazing ways. And I think that's somewhat the journey that you're seeing Gen AI on, is that it's going from this tool that, these small tools that were doing things like prompting captions or allowing you to do voice interaction to ask what a thing is, to now where we're at, it's becoming the standard. If you think about things like voice remotes, they're going to get even more intense and be able to interact with you in even more ways. And that's a huge accessibility gain. For user experience, for user experience hardware for accessible communities, you're going to get to a place where, these generative models have seen enough accessibility technology that they can take the first pass at generating what, a mobility accessible controller for video games would look like. And I think you see Microsoft and Sony doing incredible work in that regard. And I think it's just going to continue to evolve, because what these generative, pre-trained transformers essentially do is they bring together in a utopian way, the genius of the internet, and they allow you to start leveraging that genius at scale to find the right questions, and then find answers and then drive answers to those right questions. There is a darker side to it as well, right? It's not all utopian like accessibility. Those captioning bots do get things wrong. The voice to text translation is sometimes terrible for people that are living with speech disabilities. There's moments where the accessible technology doesn't match up to the lives that people live, right? And so it's not a single silver bullet at the end of the day. What it is it's a pathway to find better solutions to those problems. At the end of the day, when we're thinking about accessible tech, it comes back to the foundations of those early scholars and activists around disability who remind us that, people who live with disabilities aren't themselves disabled like naturally. It's a social process that builds institutions and ways of doing things and buildings and media that is basically excluding them. And so I think that's one of the promises and exciting things that from just like an accessibility standpoint, we can start to prod at and think about and dig into with Gen AI.
Yeah, like, it's obviously great. It's make it more inclusive for people. But like I said, you got to be more. It's like new, like anything new, isn't it? It's a learning process. There's going to be errors, so you got to be mindful of that. Because obviously, you see now, obviously, like you can do texts, just speaking and things like this. It makes life a lot easier, and it's obviously great for other people as well. Because we touched on it then, so as it becomes more AI becomes more integrated into user experience design, guess what ethical considerations should the designers and developers keep in mind?
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of things there. Let's jump off and make a smooth transition from the last question. Like if we were going to try and use generative AI to find patterns in accessible technologies, we have to be really honest that what we're doing, assuming that we're doing it on a commercial side, is what we're doing is we're taking all of that data about people who are excluded from dominant communities, shoving it into a generalized transformer model that will consume their actions and things like that for future inferences, and then spitting out a way that we can better bring them into the fold. Now, there's an altruistic level of it where it's like, I want our shopping experience or our restaurant dining experience or our delivery experience or our media experience to be as accessible as possible, to be as available to people as possible. But the fundamentals in the context that we're stuck in is that to also make money has to be appended on that. And then, you're looking at this whole pipeline where you're taking these accessible actions, this accessible data, and you're pumping it into a model that has some levels of accessibility, but are trained on predominantly, body normative ways of doing things, and getting potential answers to try and make more money. And there's a complication there. It's not easily resolved. Part of the challenge is living in the complication, and humans are the only ones who are going to be able to make that decision. Like, classic kind of business turn of phrase, is the juice worth the squeeze? But the question is, like, is the juice like ethically worth the squeeze? Or, how do we think about that in relationship not only to that kind of disability paradigm, but also inclusivity paradigms, and then also just privacy paradigms. Like, all of these come with these new questions. And I think one of the cool things about now is that we're exploring. We're definitely as a social whole, in a utopian way, in a global exploration phase of everybody trying to figure out what this new dawn and tomorrow looks like. But I think that we're going to start running into places where we have to answer these more difficult questions of like, okay, what are we actually doing? Thinking of inclusivity, you've got Google, who's really struggling with image generation lately, and it was an interesting conversation, especially around these like diverse depictions of anti-diverse organizations. It was like all of the memes about diverse Nazis going around in terms of Google's image generation. There were some great conversations, and I think that's also very valuable in terms of this space, is that it does prompt people to start having conversations not only about their privacy, but also things like representation. And it's uncomfortable, and sometimes we have to figure out ways to keep people safe in those conversations. But I do think at the end of the day, it's valuable to prompt the conversation around things like accessibility, privacy, diversity, how we get along as a society. That's ultimately going to start to fall on those user experience shoulders as the interfaces become the thing that people interact with Gen AI through.
Yeah, and I think you touched on it earlier. Look, we still need that. Technology is not going to take over. We still need that human oversight, don't we? We need the double check.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the most exciting thing is that we get to have these new conversations, right? So one of the things I have noticed as we explore, Gen AI and find pathways to production, is we're starting to move away from as many conversations, like we're still having them about like classic engineering, operations, scalability, cost, latency, performance, to also these other conversations where engineers are starting to weigh in on like, well, is this the right way to do this? Like, what are the ethics of this? Is there an element of creativity and, humanity that we lose by having generative AI take this feature or that feature? Like, what are these trade-offs? And I think what's good for us, especially in the technology world, is that we're having these philosophical conversations almost detached from the core conversation of technological enablement. There's a lot of stuff. A lot of people have spilled a lot of ink talking about the way technology philosophically approaches the world. And what's interesting about Gen AI is it's become such a kind of democratic force, is that now everybody's having these interesting conversations that are no longer purely grounded by, is technology good? It's introducing shades of gray, and it's introducing debates, and that makes everyone better. That's how we all get somewhere better together.
Yeah, and I think now everyone now it's a race to get their data, isn't it? I mean, look, everyone's focused on data engineering, data management, data governance. That's key now. That's as quicker you get that intact, then you can get more data, and then that's feeding you more information and it giving you insights.
Yeah, the recent announcement that, places like Tumblr and WordPress are going to provide data to AI. Like, part of me is absolutely terrified to see what a Tumblr-powered Gen AI chat agent looks like, because it's a weird place. It's not a bad place. Like, some parts of it, like any other part of the internet, is bad, but there's also parts of it that are just like the most excitingly mundane things. It's kids talking about like their favorite anime, and it's, people exploring their gender and their sexuality. And I think that there's a big question there of, like, first off, like, from a user experience, like, you've got this chat agent designed off this strange data set. What's that like? But there's also this historical component of, to the philosophical debates we we're just talking about. It's like, if I were in my 20s, I think the question I would be trying to figure out is, like, did 13-year-old me produce this content in a way that they would be happy if I told them, like, came from the future and said, hey, this is going to be used to train, like, robots to talk to you. I can't imagine many 20-year-olds are excited about their 13-year-old self powering decision-making engines, right? And even beyond like the kind of cliche of that, I do think there is an element of privacy and data sovereignty that we do have to ask in those regards. And, like, this data was never made for these purposes. Nobody ever agreed to that when they created the data. So what's happening with these, after the fact, post hoc license changes that allow companies to do this? And I do think that there's some value in us, yes, it's interesting from a legal perspective, and I have friends in law who are having these conversations and really excited and interested in them. But I think there's a broader framework to have that conversation that we should be talking about is, what did 13-year-old me want, and is this actually valuable? Yeah. And would this comply with that? And that's, if the answer is no, that's where we're going to start to see things like, artists now poisoning their artwork to prevent bots. We're even starting to see LinkedIn posts with poison because people are getting so many ChatGPT bot responses to LinkedIn posts. It's just an interesting moment where there is a little resistance outside the framework of your typical legal frameworks that we have to work through together.
Yeah, I think, like, you can definitely tell what's a ChatGPT post on LinkedIn now.
Yeah.
It stands out.
Yeah, and it's nothing about it that is wrong, and it's nothing about it that is perfect, right? Because the flip side is something too good to be true. There's just, one of my favorite German philosophers, Walter Benjamin, has this essay called "The Work of Art in the Age of Its Technological Reproducibility," and there's just something he talks about, like, of a piece of art. Like, you look at an original piece of art, and there's just something about it that feels peoply, right? Like, it was made for humans by humans. And I think what's fascinating about the LinkedIn space with all these ChatGPT bots is you look at it and there's nothing that stands out to you as though it is not written by a person, but there is something about it that just feels inhuman. It doesn't have an aura, as Benjamin would call it. And I think there's a lot of fun that is going to be had by, artists and cultural critics and folks outside the data space with generative AI, having it generate even more aura-less things as acts of resistance or parody. There's going to be this, I think that there's going to be a really wonderful surrealist moment. I think we're going to have some fun political art in the style of, of those late like 20th century artists. There's going to be some cool, weird Banksy stuff that it's just such an awesome moment from a cultural production perspective. And you're just going to get this lovely smattering of, Magritte's and Picasso type works and performance works. And it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely. Next text to video is going to be that'd probably be slated. Yeah, that'd be next on LinkedIn, wouldn't it? The posts, there'd be just onslaught of that. Obviously, I guess people want to get their point across, but I think like you want that again personalized touch, don't you? You want that actually feel that you're getting the feel from the person, not from the computer.
Yeah, and I do worry, in a long-term kind of way, like thinking about like the big horizon. I do worry that the Gen AI moment is going to oversaturate in some ways, where we're going to have this flip back to the love of things that are curated. I think everybody, I think it was Roku that essentially went to hand curating everything again for a brief moment of time, and everybody kind of poked fun at it. But I think they were seeing something or had their fingers on a pulse that's very interesting, because like the LinkedIn posts, if everything on Netflix is kind of something you'd watch, but not quite, feels kind of empty, you might not enjoy that experience. Whereas if you have someone there who's saying like, look, this cultural moment, it requires us pulling out the Jurassic Parks and the 28 Days Later and these other kind of quasi-economic horror video, like movies, that's going to feel something more human and attractive than a highly personalized robotic list of like, these are the things I think you're going to love. And that's just the thing that I'm a little fearful of, maybe not fearful, but something I see on the horizon, especially as like Meta, for example, I think just released its first generalizable recommendation model. There's a lot of questions about how do you use it, what do you do with it, et cetera. But that has that risk of just over personalizing, over blanketing. And to the prior conversation, you lose the aura, the magic of movies and movie recommendations and curation.
Yeah, because you probably just keep getting like on Netflix, or if you keep getting recommended films, you're gonna ignore it in the end, don't you? It's gonna get it'll dilute its appeal to you, wouldn't it? You go to recommendations from friends or that sort of thing. So I guess obviously companies have got to be careful in terms of the effort they put in, making sure it is of a high standard. Because if it drops below someone's expectation, that it's just gonna like weaken their product.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to make it just every other product with a different colored skin on it. And with the personalization of coloring, like we were just talking about with like branding, it's going to be almost like any product, right? Like there's just nothing that's Netflix aside from what I could search for that's different from Max, that's different from Paramount Plus, that's different from Peacock, etc. Like I don't think that that's a good world. I think that's a bridge too far to a world we don't actually want to live in.
Yeah, definitely. So we've touched on what is the role of data in shaping AI-driven user experience, and how can we ensure the data privacy and security here? So I know obviously security is a big element now as well.
Yeah, security becomes an increasingly large element, especially if you think about the fields that are using chat agents in vulnerable life moments, right? Like if you're thinking about like mental health, for example, we're starting to see a lot of pushback on the mental health startup space because of the ways that they've tried to automate or AI their way around providing good mental health advice. In those spaces, data privacy, data security become absolutely crucial. In spaces that are a little more mundane, like the media, we still take it very seriously. For example, if you're working in news, it's not an obligation, but there is a sense of there's not a legal requirement, but there is a sense of obligation that you need to protect your users from the ability to look at and profile you based off of news that you've read. and that, that's for external entities. Internally, that data still gets used for advertising, and that's a contradiction that I think a lot of news places are working through. We saw a really great moment in recommendations. I want to say it was probably, almost pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, where people were starting to think about differential privacy. How do I build recommendation engines that make good recommendations, but I don't have to know your history of doing something? Those are conversations that I think are going to continue into the Gen AI world as people approach generating personalization, generating user experiences, et cetera. But I think the role that data plays in all of that isn't just as the fuel to make the whole Gen AI thing go vroom. I think the role that data is going to play is in regards to, like, are people actually using it? Like, do they actually care? And what does that arc of use look like? There were some early conversations of like, hey, is ChatGPT just writing college papers? And everybody's looking at the line charts and trying to see where the peaks and the valleys are. It's dead in the summer, it's dead in December, but there's this giant spike in May and there's this giant spike in November. Hey, I remember this life cycle. I think those are the places where data very much matters, because it lets you start to ask the question of how useful this is and where in people's lives is it useful. Let's say in a very simplistic way, sure, it was writing kids' college papers for them. Okay, cool. Well, the place of data is then to ask, like, do those kids actually learn more generating Gen AI papers and correcting them than they would have classic plagiarizing off of Wikipedia? Like, I think there is something valuable to that. And I think of it in terms of being a musician. Like, I was trained as a jazz musician. I worked as a jazz musician for a long time. And some of the first work that you do as a like budding professional jazz musician is you transcribe, jazz solos, and you play them over the top of the recording. And then after you've embodied them to the point where you can just play them off the top of your head, you start stealing those licks in different places for different songs, and then you're learning them in different keys, and then you're learning how to apply the logic to different styles or different genres. And I do think that there's something valuable about using data in this case for college kids plagiarizing papers. See if they're doing something similar. Like, yeah, they're generating their like 18th century American history paper. Great, but do they know more about 18th century American history now because they had to go through and make sure that this thing didn't make stuff up? Like, can they apply some of the things they learned fixing that paper, fixing that prompt to other parts of their lives? Are they then able to take the big concepts of things like freedom and democracy and disagreement, et cetera, in the context of bad things like slavery and whatnot, and discrimination, and apply that to other historical understandings? Like, there's something here that's really exciting about the use of data to evaluate and have conversations around what these Gen AI tools do to us as a society in the context of using them. And I think for let's say, like, for a storefront, there's something valuable in being able to look at one of your generative AI assistants. Let's say you're like generating images for products. It's like, hey, like, is this actually satisfying people? Like, yeah, sure, buys might go up because it looks really attractive, but our returns also going up. Like, what are we seeing as the impact here? That's going to be the role of data. And I think just like you need more data to feed these beasts, you're going to see an explosion of data to measure these beasts.
Yeah, no. I think also, I mean, even if you take like, I guess, like a fitness app, if you get the dashboard, the results of that, and then if it digs deeper into that, obviously to give you more insight into if you increase your fitness or you get these results, I think that's going to open up. The data privacy needs to be like tight there, but if that can open up more doors, it's like how it can impact people's lives or like fitness. That's going to be like amazing for people, because obviously it'll keep you motivated to, like, I want to hit that target and things like that. It's going to open a lot more doors, and obviously the data, I guess you can get a dashboard in a dashboard in another dashboard. It's going to just open up more doors, and it's going to give you more insight and exciting times.
And I do think, much to my analytics colleagues, like, kind of chagrin, I'm sure we'll get hate mail for this, but I do think Gen AI is going to quickly kill off dashboards. There is something valuable about a KPI dashboard, being able to look at something and it has your, a visualization and explanation of your business's top 5 metrics. I don't think that's ever going away. Like, let's just all agree that's there's a really valuable experience there and conversation starter there that is true. But I think that those dashboards that sit the level below for all of those different business functions and business units and organizations and use cases, I do think we're going to start to see these smart analytics companions start to be able to answer the questions and quickly. So no longer is it like someone asking me, hey, can you throw together a presentation that shows us how our relevance metric has changed over the last 3 years? And me going then to an analyst and saying, hey, this is where my data for my relevance metrics lives. Can you show this thing over the last 3 years? And then putting together, their own version of it with some other recommendations for what should happen, and then giving it to me, and then me giving it to someone above me or to one of my business partners. Instead, that business partner is just going to be able to, hit the little microphone button on their phone and be like, hey, what happened to relevance over the last 3 years? Can you show me? And it's just going to show you a plot. And that's going to be great for business, right? Like, think of all of the other work that, myself and that analysts were able to focus on because we weren't building a, PowerPoint deck to answer this one simple question while divining all of the other questions that would need to go around it for context or for actionability. That's going to be something that's really fun and exciting, but also a little uncomfortable in data organizations.
Yeah, I think obviously like the real-time analytics is going to be amazing, isn't it? It's going to be a game changer for. It's just it more and more. It's going to give you more insight and just it enhance your solution or product or service, whatever you're doing. But it's also interesting to touch about. I think there's going to be like data analysts that specialize within like UX to get that. So I think that's going to be new space. Obviously, and this can sort of touch onto the next question is like, how do you think the rise of AI in UX will impact jobs and skills in the design industry?
My favorite thing about UX designers historically, like, and I'll caveat this and contextualize it with a number of the UX designers I've worked with usually come from art school, right? They're artists who have wanted to move into UX because they love it or they are supporting their creative careers, etc. And the thing I love about collaborating with them is they have the most interesting questions that they approach design with. And I think what we're going to see with Gen AI is that we're going to shift, from a model where it's the best Figma maker as the best UX designer to more of those people who ask the best questions, who are starting to dig into thinking. And I think that's going to pull all of us along with it. There's going to be a lot more conversation around like beyond like analytics. How do I do this thing? I'm a master of SQL. I can build Tableau dashboards, et cetera. It's going to be what is the general principles under which we try to share information? Like, is there a commitment to sharing it rapidly? At what cost? Is there a commitment to sharing contextual information? At what risk of information glut? I think those are the types of questions that is going to change. And ultimately what will happen is the same thing that started to happen to product managers, is we're all going to have to become much better and smarter about being product centric. And that's going to cut into those boundaries that product managers have historically loved. So you're going to see more UX designers taking the lead on building and designing products. So we've already seen that at a couple of places who, they announced the death of the product manager role and everybody's like, oh, they killed product managers. Instead, it's more of these kind of mergers of like, we need designers and tighter together. And then as Gen AI becomes more centric to apps, it's going to be design, product, data, and engineering to sit closer together. And that sitting closer together over the course of 5 or 10 years is going to create these people who have multiple skills. You'll see design data scientists. You're going to start to see, UX AI engineers. You're going to start to see designers who can build their own, end-to-end app, whether it's by auto-generating the code through a Copilot, or it's actually having the skills to go through and build an application from the ground up as a part of the design process. I think that's some of the ways that we'll see this shift, because ultimately, as this automates the boring stuff and accelerates us into doing better, faster work, jobs are going to change. Some are going to go away. And, hopefully we'll get to that Keynesian dream of working a couple days a week and then like hanging out the rest of it, right? Like, we're going to get to that 30-hour work week, and then we'll get to that 20-hour work week. And, fingers crossed.
Yeah, and it's interesting to say, 'cause even in for testing, you get that's morphing into like testing with the AI skills as well. So I think roles, it's just all going to evolve, isn't it? Like, you're going to get the data scientists that they got the specialist UX UI skills. It's going to be just again just more specialists in different areas. And like it's just I think people, yeah, I mean the businesses that succeed are going to be the ones that are constantly upskilling and getting. So you don't want to be spending all your money on attracting staff, because that's stop start. People move. You want to keep upskilling people within your business as things grow, and with that, you need to be, I guess, forward thinking, because most businesses, they'll just look. We need a data scientist for this requirement, but what about in 2-3 years? What's that skill set going to look like? I think businesses need to be more adaptive there, because even now, like I guess even not touch base with data engineers, it's not just your BI data skills now. That's
Right.
moving into software API skills. So that's just showing that things are moving and people got to learn new skills.
Yeah, and I think, while it does push people towards more software, API, like, for lack of a better word, let's call them the hard skills, there's a level of Gen AI and Gen AI production design that uses things like watchtowers to protect us from from outputting offensive content or putting out content that alienates groups of people, etc. I think that this is also a moment where everybody's been asking, like, what's the role of the humanities? Why are we making these kids who are doing data engineering take humanities classes? And it's going to be because you're now going to have to design unit tests and technical gating for things that are philosophical and principled concepts. And you're going to have to be able to connect that soft, squishy humanities brain with that hard technical, engineering hand, and marry them together to find solutions to problems in a way that manages Gen AI. If it's left to its own devices, it's going to find a way to upset everybody in some way or form. And as an engineer, you're going to start writing those tests and creating those gates and watchtowers that prevent that from happening in alignment with the principles of the product or the company you're building for.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, what can you share some success stories where AI has significantly improved the user experience? Obviously, I know we've touched on a few.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we are in a moment where you're starting to see generative AI and discriminative AI in the mathematical sense, like actually powering user experiences that matter and that change things. And I think we're finally having a conversation about things like news feeds that needs to happen, where we basically cordon off entire populations into echo chambers. All of that being driven by AI is actually very good. Those are huge success stories. To be able to find the problem and start to find a pathway to fixing it, I think is much more valuable than building like the perfect Gen AI product. But you're also starting to see things that are powered by Gen AI that are really interesting. The chat experiences, being able to get to a resolution faster in a chat experience is actually a very good experience.
Yeah.
It as a person who has chatted the chatbot sometimes when like your pizza's too cold when it shows up, or the grocery delivery is off, they got you barbecue sauce instead of caramel topping for your ice cream. Those interactions are much more speedy with those chat agents, because the chat agent is there to resolve that problem and isn't bound by the scalability of people, and specifically, offshore or nearshore people labor. I think those are really good success stories. I think we're about to see cool innovations in recommendations across all of the media companies as they put their own spin on how you leverage this. We've got some stuff coming out in Comcast. We've seen some really interesting, press releases from places like Disney. We're right at the precipice where the hype wave is actually going to start turning into production capabilities, and the world's going to be our oyster from there. We'll see if they're successful. We'll see if they manage to delight users and customers without removing that aura of like human touch that we were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, it's still. I mean, you touched on it, chatbots. I mean, a couple of years ago, you'd be lucky to get an answer, wouldn't you? Like, they weren't like, yeah, they just weren't there. But now you can actually have that conversation and get places, which is obviously Good to hear.
Yeah, and I mean, even search becomes easier, right? Like whether we're talking about on-platform search, where historically places would hide their customer contact and you'd have to dig for it. Now you can ask the search, be like, hey, where's your customer contact? And because it's a contextual agent, it's like customer contacts here, click this button. But you're also seeing it in search engines. Perplexity is exploding because it's such an interesting change in experience. The Microsoft Copilot on the sidebar, really different way of thinking about search and finding information, especially when you compare it to where we were 10 and 20 years ago. Like Yahoo is the front page of the internet. Like this is just a very different paradigm for those kind of things, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, and I think I know obviously Gen AI has been around for ages, but its kickoff was just over a year ago, wasn't it? And it's still, I guess, still early days, isn't it? I guess people's businesses are still finding their ways. Still, the strategy work's got to go involved, get the data. So it has been a lot of it has been the basic, or not basics, but like chatbots, things like that. I think it's going to be interesting to see like how when the more data you get, the deeper you dive into it, and then it's more customizable for your industry. It's making that real impact and making just the more data they get, the more insight they're going to get, and then it's going to be able to open them. Like again, you've got that product mindset. It's going to open the doors to think, oh, actually, we could do this, we could do that, and it's going to be interesting to see for businesses. And I think it's still early days. I think it's going to be once they've got the data, then we'll be seeing a lots more interesting products, services come out.
Yeah, and I think I do want to point out though that I think the sleeper hit, the like mega business disruptor and differentiator in the next 6 to 10 months is going to be someone who was under the radar because they weren't chasing the Gen AI hype. And I think that's important for businesses, is that while there's a lot of promise in this technology, there's also a lot of risk of spending yourself into oblivion, and that there's also other technologies out there that are still advancing, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's been another thing, isn't it? Just if you throw your eggs into like Gen AI, when actually you could have probably done it cheaper another route, or maybe even better using another tool. It's the hard bit now, isn't it? There's so many tools, get apps, things getting chucked on the marketplace. You need to stay focused on your goal, because if you get easily distracted, there's this new product out, you spend whatever amount of time on that, then you've wasted time, and your competitors get ahead. You need to be straight laced and keep in mind of your end goal, basically, don't you?
Yeah, and I think there's lessons to be learned historically from data science in this regard. In the 2010, I think it was the 2010s, we were trying to use computer vision to do discriminative work, essentially. Like we wanted to take, some kind of convolutional neural net and put something in a category. And I think ultimately that all fizzled out and failed because that's not what convolutional neural nets do well. And I think that there's a lesson for Gen AI to learn in that, is that, while there is a lot of promise, we have to remember to your point, like there's a core fundamentals. We have to go back to those fundamentals and ask if, solving the problem in this way that breaks the fundamentals is actually more valuable than solving it with better fundamentals. It's not to be a naysayer or pour water on the exciting moment we're in, but I do think there is a level of that kind of, there's a shadow over that from the hype waves, where people aren't stepping back and saying, wait a second, like, am I actually using generative for the right generative problem, or am I trying to use generative for some kind of discriminative math problem?
Yeah, and I think people can easily get sucked into using a new technology because it's the talk of the market, talk of the town. When like again, it could be like another option for you. So it's definitely interesting times ahead. So what are the current challenges and limitations of AI in creating effective user experiences then?
I think it's going to be that exact question. How do you generate user experiences without, spending yourself into oblivion? Like if you're leveraging these large amounts of data and you wanted to say, like, if let's say you wanted to personalize the app experience for every user in your $300 million or 300 million user base, that's going to get really expensive when you realize how many tokens are actually in the image identification that you're building and passing off to either an OpenAI kind of API, or even your internally hosted, internally built model. Like that's going to be a huge risk. And so it's going to be about choosing the right problems that solve frictions for users today and for problems that users are going to have in 3 years. There's still, like, I think you started with this point, there's still an element of this that has got to be strategically driven. And I think that's really the top message there, is it's really going to be about defining the problem correctly, having a strategic vision, and making sure that you don't accidentally over engineer and remove the aura, have terrible user experiences all in the sake of saying, hey, we're using Gen AI.
Or go down the wrong path. Like, yes, like it's like any tech project, isn't it? You need that end goal, and if you get a new technology comes in and you get moving down that path, and then and you lose all that time, you just you can lose your competitive advantage, or your competitor gets a product out before you, or things like that. It's just, you need to, I guess, be aligned to that. So yeah. So what are some emerging AI technologies that you believe will significantly shape user experience design?
I think one of the interesting use cases I haven't seen yet that I've been thinking a lot about, just on the side as a data science practitioner, is being able to do generative haptic feedback. I think is going to be a very interesting space when we think about all of our mobile devices buzz and vibrate and light up and things like that. I think there's going to be some interesting play with that sensory experience around apps. And so I think you're going to start to see generative models, and I would hope to see generative models start to lead us down that pathway of like, well, what kind of sensory experiences or haptic touch experiences can I generate from a phone or from a screen based off of these kind of experiments, essentially.
Yeah, no, it's been I guess there's a lot that can be done, isn't there? It's a whole. It just opens up everything so much. So it's going to be interesting to see. And then, in your opinion, what's going to be the most exciting aspect of the future of AI for user experience?
The most exciting experience, that's a great question. Honestly, I think it's going to be the realization of things like data sovereignty. Like the most exciting experience is going to be the ability to barter with your data for different experiences. So you can decide like, hey, look, personalized recommendations, I don't care. I'm not giving you my data for that. And having that exchange for every element of personalization. So if we're thinking about, generative models that replace a Coke can with a Pepsi can in a movie, you might say like, I don't care what soda it is. I'm not giving you my taste preferences. I'm not giving you my experience, my credit history, et cetera. And it'll go all the way to things like financial products, to investment portfolios. I think finally being able to realize a sense of like individual autonomous data sovereignty is going to be an exciting horizon. And look, we may not get there in 10 years or 20 years, but I think we're eventually, if you look at places like where data regulation and AI regulation are going in the EU, I do think we're going to find a future where we're starting to have these marketplaces of yourself and all of the data that you generate, and getting to choose what you do with that and what you exchange that data for. I think that's going to be really cool.
Oh, brilliant. Great insights, and thanks for your time on the podcast.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, Ben.
Thank you.